I'm curious about the social media platforms. A fair number of them have either significantly changed or straight up removed their monitoring or misinformation monitoring programs. I'm thinking of X. I'm thinking of Meta. Has that impacted your ability to monitor that ecosystem? Does that concern you in terms of how quickly and efficiently palpably false information is being addressed?
And maybe I'll start with Larissa and then we'll turn to Al.
It hasn't affected our ability. It just makes our capacity and what we're doing all the more important.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
Just to note that the Canadian Digital Media Research Networks on Friday posted their early assessment of the campaign. As you may know, they provide an assessment of the overall Canadian ecosystem, and that's one of the issues they raised.
And then my other question was in terms of disinformation campaigns that you may or may not have spotted. Has CITE or any government entity asked the platforms to combat or remove any particular networks or campaigns, or since in the last few weeks, even in the pre-writ period, any networks? I saw TikTok, for example, said they'd taken one down back in January, but it was a small one. Have you guys made any similar requests, and was that followed up on or accepted?
Start, Bridget. I don't know if you have anything.
Sure, absolutely. So when we look at the situation of mis and disinformation, we look at it pretty holistically along with our colleagues in CITE. In the CITE construct, it's very much looking at whether or not there are links to foreign interference. And so one way we do that is through our entire mandate within the communication security establishment. So looking at using our intelligence mandate, signals intelligence, to determine if there are foreign links. So that's one aspect of what we do in understanding where mis and disinformation is coming from and attributing it. Separately from that, we do a lot of work to understand how mis and disinformation is propagated online and the tools and techniques used by the cyber threat actors to do that. And we have spent some time in the last couple of years analyzing a lot of those threats. We don't necessarily go directly to the platforms to address those specific issues, but do have discussions with the platforms about the threats that we do see. And so have shared with platforms the concerns that we have in the use of artificial intelligence techniques, for example, both to generate and promote mis and disinformation.
RM Canada has a standard practice of engaging social media platforms when we have identified a foreign connection. So we've done that in relation to Spamouflage. We've done it in relation to the doxing websites we've seen. We did it in relation to the work we did with CITE during the Liberal Party of Canada leadership campaign, and we have done it in relation to this issue of the bounties.
I will do a last call for questions. Oh, there's a question online from Riddhi Kachella from the Hill Times. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. You might have already answered a part of it, but I wanted to specifically ask you about TikTok, since you mentioned threats from the PRC, and in the past we've heard about, how TikTok could kind of be linked to the Chinese government and administration. Is there any concerns about content being like political content on TikTok and how it's influencing people regarding the elections? Thank you.
Bridget?
Maybe I'll just say, as I had just mentioned, we do look at the content of understanding what a particular mis and disinformation issue may be. So we, within this communication security establishment, don't monitor what we see online. So our colleagues, for example, at the GAC-RRM, do monitor for mis and disinformation. But when it comes to particular issues of mis and disinformation and understanding who may be behind a particular campaign, we can and do use our foreign intelligence mandate to inform those connections.
And I would say that we see the campaigns across all the platforms, and from the RRM perspective, we don't treat one platform any different from another, and often actually we monitor for cross-platform operations as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Final question, anybody? Any last call? Emily?
You've talked about engaging the social media platforms. Are you satisfied with how they are dealing with your concerns?
Al, would you like to go first?
So we're pleased that they're engaging with us. That engagement occurs bilaterally and also in a multilateral group. So we're pleased with that part of the engagement. I think it's important to say that the Government of Canada does not provide instruction to social media platforms. Instead, what we do, and I think Brigitte mentioned it quite properly, is what's provided is a sharing of information. It's more like a clearinghouse. And what we do is we encourage them to enforce their community standards.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that's exactly correct.
Okay, Vanessa?
I would. I think it's really important to remember that countering disinformation is a whole of society effort. So the questions are focused on what we're expecting social media platforms to do. But Al mentioned earlier that there are other think tanks and enterprises that are looking at this ecosystem. And I would encourage Canadians to also think of themselves as being active participants in there. So if there are concerns from various communities or individuals about information that is perceived to be disinformation, we encourage you to go to the Democratic Institution's website, look at the tools there that are prepared to help you engage with that information. And if you have your own concerns specific to the ability to proceed with this democratic process that are elections, report to the social media platforms. And if you have concerns about specific instances that could be foreign interference, please encourage you to report to site in that regard so we can continue our monitoring effectively.
And maybe if I can add to that too, on that theme of encouraging resiliency and the ability to recognize and understand what may be mis and disinformation. As I mentioned before, one of the issues that we've seen in the past couple of years is the increased use of artificial intelligence, both to generate and spread mis and disinformation. We have recently published a document, Threats to Democratic Process 2025, that outlines those threats and concerns. Encourage everyone to read through the document. Understanding those threats is an important part of being resilient.
Hey, Chris.
I just want to come back to what Ms. Galadza said earlier. You mentioned RRM engages with the platform. You mentioned a number of examples, including not just the Spamouflage, but the bounty program. When you say you've engaged with them, what does that mean? Have you asked them, for example, to take down content?
As Al explained, we don't ask them to do anything other than uphold their own rules. And so when we call them, it's to share with them what we're seeing and flag that we think this might be something you want to measure up against your own policies. And they take that away and they make their own decisions. The challenge with this information, once it lives in the digital ecosystem, is that it can reemerge. It has spread in ways that we don't necessarily see until it reemerges again. So we engage those social media platforms as soon as we can, but there's no guarantee that even if they take as much action as they possibly can that the information hasn't already spread. And that's why we will go back to them again and again. When we have something to share, we will engage the social media platforms. And I just want to underscore what my colleagues have said, that by sharing the information about how digital transnational repression, for instance, is operationalized by a hostile actor using technology, leveraging potentially even your social media accounts, we help people to identify it and we remove its power. And that then we hope over time changes the calculus for the malign state actors in conducting this kind of activity in Canada and with Canadians.
And have you found that social media platforms have been cooperative with, say, you go to X and say, we think this breaks your terms of use. For each of the platforms, the big four, let's say five, do they do that, or do some ignore and then others listen? How would you assess that for each?
Always answer our phone calls, and they take the action as they see fit.
I think this concludes the press conference. Thank you very much, everybody.